The Great Hall of Station Meridian 7 had never looked more beautiful than it did on this particular evening. And Ambassador Krelvath of the Velician Concordat felt a deep sense of pride swelling within his three hearts as he watched the final preparations come together. 17 long rotations. He had worked without rest to create the perfect welcome feast. And now everything was exactly as he had imagined it would be. When the humans finally arrived at their station for the very first time in galactic history, crystal formations hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, catching the light from 1,000 floating orbs and scattering rainbows across every surface in the massive room that stretched nearly half a kilometer from one end to the other. Tables made from the rarest woods of 12 different worlds stood in perfect rows, each one covered with dishes from 47 member species of the Galactic Concordat, representing every flavor and texture that the known universe had to offer. Krelvath walked slowly between the tables, his long blue robes trailing behind him as his secondary eyes checked every small detail, while his primary eyes looked ahead toward the main entrance, where the human delegation would soon appear. "Is everything prepared?" asked his assistant, a young Velician named Torvex, who had never seen a human before and was both excited and terrified at the same time. "Everything is perfect," Krelvath replied, though his voice carried just a hint of nervousness that he could not quite hide. "The humans are a new species to our galaxy, and we must show them that the Concordat welcomes all peaceful beings with open arms and generous hearts." The Velicians were a proud people, tall and thin with skin that shifted colors based on their emotions, and they had built their reputation on being the finest hosts in all of known space. No species had ever left a Velician banquet feeling anything less than completely satisfied and deeply honored, but the humans were different from any species the Concordat had ever encountered before. And the reports that had reached Krelvath's desk over the past several months had left him feeling both curious and slightly concerned. They came from a world called Earth, a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star in a quiet corner of the galaxy that no one had bothered to explore, until a human ship had suddenly appeared at the edges of Concordat space. The scientists who had studied Earth from a distance had classified it as a Category 12 death world, which meant that it was one of the most hostile environments for life that anyone had ever discovered. Volcanic eruptions, massive storms, extreme temperatures, deadly radiation from their own sun, and an atmosphere filled with oxygen, which was a highly reactive gas that could cause fires and explosions under the right conditions. How any species could evolve on such a world was a mystery that the greatest minds in the Vice Concordat were still trying to solve, and yet the humans had not only survived on this nightmare planet, they had thrived and built cities and created technology advanced enough to carry them across the stars. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Chun was the human chosen to represent his species at this historic first meeting, and Krelvath had read his file at least 100 times, trying to understand what kind of being he would be dealing with. File said that Marcus was a former combat medic, which meant he had been trained to heal the wounded during times of war, and that he had saved many lives during something called the Pacific Conflict before being selected for diplomatic duties. The Bayer photographs showed a male human of average height with dark hair and kind eyes, and nothing about his appearance suggested that he came from a world of death and destruction. Krelvath found this confusing, but also somewhat reassuring perhaps. The humans were not as frightening as their homeworld suggested. Perhaps they were simply survivors who had overcome impossible odds and now wanted nothing more than to find friends among the stars. This was the hope that Krelvath held in his hearts as the main doors finally opened and the human delegation walked into the Great Hall. Marcus Chun entered first, wearing what his briefing materials called a dress uniform. A formal outfit of dark blue fabric with golden decorations on the shoulders and chest. He was smiling, and his eyes moved around the room with obvious wonder and appreciation as he took in the crystal formations and the floating lights, and the incredible spread of food that covered every table. Behind him came 3 other humans, 2 females and 1 male, all wearing similar uniforms and all showing the same expression of genuine amazement. "Ambassador Krelvoth," Marcus said, walking forward and extending his hand in what the Velician had learned was a human greeting gesture. "Thank you so much for this incredible welcome. And please know that everyone on Earth is honored by your invitation." Krelvoth carefully wrapped his long fingers around the human's hand and shook it gently. Noting with surprise how warm the human's skin felt against his own, Lieutenant Commander Chun, "It is our greatest pleasure to welcome humanity to the galactic community, and we hope this evening will be the beginning of a long and beautiful friendship between our peoples." The other diplomats began to arrive, representatives from dozens of species, each one curious to see the humans from the Death World with their own eyes. There were the Kroth, massive warriors with 4 arms and skin-like armor who nodded respectfully at Marcus as they passed by his table. There were the Morellians, small delicate beings with huge eyes who could sense emotions and who clustered together nervously whenever they got too close to the humans. There were the Yenniks, the Torvalians, the Kesperoth, and so many others that Marcus quickly lost track of all the names and species he was supposed to remember, but he did not feel overwhelmed or afraid, because everyone he met seemed genuinely friendly and welcoming, and the food looked absolutely incredible. That was when Krelvoth made his announcement, and that was when everything began to go wrong in honor of our human guests. The ambassador declared, his voice carrying across the entire hall. "We have prepared our most sacred delicacy, the legendary thornfruit reduction, which we offer only to those we consider worthy of the highest respect." Servers appeared carrying small crystal bowls filled with a deep crimson sauce that seemed to glow with an inner light. Marcus watched as the other diplomats received their portions with expressions of awe and reverence, and he felt touched that the Velicians would share something so precious with him. What Marcus did not know, what he could not possibly know because of a translation error in his briefing packet, was that the thornfruit reduction contained one of the deadliest organic compounds in the entire galaxy. The sauce was meant to be consumed in tiny ceremonial drops, just enough to touch the tongue and prove one's courage. It was never, under any circumstances, meant to be eaten like regular food, but Marcus did not know this. And so when the server placed a generous portion on his plate, he smiled and nodded and prepared to enjoy what he assumed was simply a delicious alien condiment. The stage was set for disaster, and no one in that great hall had any idea what was about to happen next. Marcus looked down at his plate with genuine appreciation, admiring the way the deep crimson sauce caught the light from the floating orbs above and seemed to shimmer like liquid rubies against the pale meat underneath. The smell was incredible, a rich and complex aroma that reminded him of the spicy dishes his grandmother used to make back home in Sichuan province when he was just a small boy sitting at her kitchen table. He picked up his fork, which was not really a fork, but some kind of alien eating tool that worked in roughly the same way, and he prepared to take his first bite around him. The other diplomats were performing their own versions of the thornfruit ceremony, and Marcus watched with interest as a Kroth warrior carefully placed a single drop of the red sauce on his armored tongue. The massive alien's face twisted in obvious pain, but he nodded once with what looked like satisfaction before quickly drinking something from a small vial that made his expression relax. Other species were doing similar things, taking the tiniest possible amounts of the sauce and then immediately consuming what Marcus assumed were palate cleansers or perhaps some kind of breath Freshener, he thought it was. Strange that everyone seemed to be in such discomfort. But he figured that maybe alien taste buds were just more sensitive than human ones, after all. Humans had evolved on a planet where they had learned to eat practically anything that did not kill them immediately. And sometimes even things that did. Marcus shrugged and decided to stop watching the others and just enjoy his meal. He scooped up a generous forkful of the pale meat, along with a large portion of the crimson sauce, and he put the whole thing in his mouth and began to chew. The taste was absolutely wonderful. Tangy and rich with a pleasant heat that built slowly on his tongue and reminded him so much of his grandmother's famous hot pot that he almost felt homesick for a moment. He chewed thoroughly, savoring every bit of the complex flavors. And then he swallowed and immediately went back for another bite. That was when he noticed that the room had gone completely silent. Marcus looked up from his plate, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth, and he found himself staring at hundreds of alien faces that were all displaying various expressions of absolute horror. Ambassador Krelvoth had turned a shade of pale purple that Marcus had not seen before, and his secondary eyes had gone so wide that they looked like they might fall out of his head. The Croth warrior, who had just completed his own thornfruit ceremony, was standing absolutely still with his mouth hanging open, all four of his arms limp at his sides. A small Morellian near the back of the hall made a strange squeaking sound and then collapsed onto the floor in what appeared to be a dead faint. "Is something wrong?" Marcus asked, genuinely confused by the reaction around him. No one answered, and the silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Marcus swallowed the food that was still in his mouth and set down his fork, suddenly worried that he had committed some terrible breach of alien etiquette that he did not understand. Maybe he was supposed to wait for everyone else to finish before taking his second bite. Or maybe there was some kind of prayer or ritual that he had skipped over without realizing. "I apologize if I did something wrong," he said, looking toward Ambassador Krelvoth with concern. "I am still learning your customs, and I did not mean to cause any offense." Krelvoth opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out, and his skin continued to shift through shades of purple and white that indicated extreme distress. A Torvalian diplomat near the center of the room suddenly screamed and pointed at Marcus's plate. "He ate it!" The Torvalian shrieked. He actually ate the thorn fruit reduction, and not just a drop, but an entire portion, and he is still alive and talking like nothing happened. This statement seemed to break the spell of silence, and suddenly everyone was talking at once in a chaotic mixture of languages that the translation software struggled to process. Marcus caught fragments of conversations happening all around him, and none of what he heard made any sense. Impossible. The compound should have stopped his hearts within seconds. Does he have redundant organs like the Velicians? And if so, how many? Perhaps the humans are immune to all toxins, which would make them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Someone call the medical team immediately before he collapses. I am formally requesting permission to study under this human, for he is clearly a master of poison resistance. Marcus sat very still in his chair, trying to process what was happening around him. And slowly a terrible realization began to form in his mind. Something about the red sauce was not normal, and the reactions of everyone around him suggested that he had just consumed something that should have killed him. But he felt completely fine, maybe even better than fine, because the spicy heat of the sauce had cleared his sinuses and given him a pleasant warm feeling in his stomach. "Excuse me," he said loudly, trying to be heard over the chaos. "Can someone please explain what is happening right now?" Croth warrior pushed through the crowd and stood before Marcus with an expression of what looked like religious reverence. "Human," the warrior said in a deep rumbling voice, "you have just consumed enough thorn fruit reduction to kill every person in this room 10 times over. And yet you sit here asking questions as if nothing has happened. So I must know your secret." Marcus blinked several times, trying to understand what he had just heard. The red sauce is poisonous? He asked. Not just poisonous, the Croth replied. It contains compound VX99, one of the most lethal organic substances ever discovered. And the only reason we serve it at all is because taking even a tiny drop is considered the ultimate test of courage and honor. Marcus looked down at his plate, which was now almost empty because he had been enjoying the sauce so much. Oh, he said quietly. Well, that explains why it was a bit spicy. Before anyone could respond to this insane statement, the doors at the far end of the hall burst open with a tremendous crash. A Velician woman in medical robes came sprinting into the room, followed by a swarm of floating chrome drones that carried emergency equipment and what looked like a very large syringe filled with glowing blue liquid. Where is the human? She shouted. I have the antidote, and we may still have time if we act quickly. The crowd parted to reveal Marcus sitting calmly at his table, very much alive and showing no signs of distress whatsoever. The medical officer skidded to a halt, her equipment drones nearly crashing into her back, and she stared at Marcus with an expression of complete disbelief. Marcus looked at her, looked at the antidote in her hand, and then looked back down at his plate where a small amount of the red sauce still remained. He was not sure what to say, so he simply did what felt natural in the moment. He reached down with his finger, scooped up the last bit of sauce, and licked it clean. Medical officer dropped the antidote, and somewhere in the crowd, another Morellian fainted. Chief Xenophysician Torval had been practicing medicine for 40 cycles, treating patients from every corner of the known galaxy, and she had believed that nothing could ever truly surprise her again. She had been wrong about that. And now she stood frozen in the middle of the banquet hall, staring at the human who had just licked deadly poison off his fingers like it was nothing more than a tasty snack. The antidote syringe lay forgotten on the polished floor where she had dropped it, the glowing blue liquid inside slowly losing its charge as the seconds ticked by. You, Torval said, her voice barely above a whisper. You should be dead right now. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, very aware that every eye in the room was fixed upon him with expressions ranging from horror to fascination to what he could only describe as worship. I feel fine, he said, which was the truth because he really did feel perfectly normal aside from a pleasant warmth in his stomach and a slight tingling on his tongue. Is there somewhere private we could talk about this? Because I think there might be some kind of misunderstanding happening here. Torval snapped out of her daze and immediately switched into professional medical mode, pulling out her scanning device and pointing it at Marcus with hands that trembled only slightly. Do not move, she commanded. I need to check your vital signs and determine how much damage has already been done to your internal organs. The scanner hummed and beeped as it analyzed the human's body, and Torval watched the results appear on her display with growing confusion and disbelief. According to her equipment, the human's heart rate was slightly elevated but well within normal ranges. His blood pressure was perfect, his neural activity showed no signs of distress, and his organ function was completely stable. There was no indication whatsoever that he had just consumed enough neurotoxin to kill a small army. This is impossible, Torval muttered, running the scan again and getting the exact same results. The compound should have destroyed your nervous system within 90 seconds of ingestion, and yet you show no symptoms at all. Maybe the sauce was not as strong as you thought, Marcus suggested helpfully, Turverhev vigorously, her skin flashing through several colors that indicated frustration and confusion. I personally verified the thorn fruit reduction before the banquet began, and I can assure you that it was at full potency, strong enough to kill any known species in the Concordat with just a few drops. She looked at Marcus with new eyes, seeing him not as a patient in need of treatment, but as a mystery that needed to be solved. You need to come with me to the medical bay immediately, she said firmly. I have to run a complete analysis of your biology, because something about your species is very different from anything we have ever encountered before." Marcus nodded and stood up from his chair, brushing crumbs off his uniform. "Of course," he agreed. "But can someone please explain to Ambassador Krulvath that I did not mean to cause any trouble? Because this is supposed to be a diplomatic meeting, and I really do not want to start an interstellar incident on my first day." Ambassador Krulvath had finally recovered enough to approach the human, though he kept a careful distance as if he were dealing with some kind of dangerous animal. "Lieutenant Commander Chun," he said slowly, "I must apologize for what has happened here tonight, because we did not realize that humans were capable of surviving substances that would be lethal to every other known species. It is really not a big deal," Marcus said, trying to ease the tension in the room. "Where I come from, we eat spicy food all the time, and this sauce was honestly not even that hot compared to some things I have had." Torval made a strange choking sound. "Did you just call Compound VX99 spicy food?" she asked incredulously. "Well, yes," Marcus replied. "It tasted like a mix between sriracha and mango chutney, which are two popular condiments back on Earth. And my grandmother used to make dishes that were much hotter than that." The Kroth warrior, who had been watching the whole exchange, suddenly dropped to one knee before Marcus. His armored head bowed in respect. "Human," the warrior declared solemnly, "your grandmother must be the greatest warrior your planet has ever produced, for she has trained you to withstand poisons that could bring down the mightiest champions of my world." Marcus opened his mouth to explain that his grandmother was actually a retired schoolteacher who just happened to enjoy cooking with lots of chili peppers. But Torval grabbed his arm and started pulling him toward the exit. "Medical bay now," she insisted. "We can discuss your grandmother's warrior training later." The crowd parted like a wave as Marcus was led through the banquet hall, and he could hear whispered conversations following him all the way to the door. "The humans are immune to poison. They eat toxins for pleasure. We must never go to war with these creatures. I wonder what else they can survive." The medical bay was a clean white room filled with equipment that Marcus did not recognize, and Torval directed him to sit on an examination table while she gathered her instruments. "I'm going to ask you some questions," she said, "and I need you to answer them as honestly and completely as possible, because what I learn here today could change everything we thought we knew about life in the galaxy." Marcus nodded and settled into a comfortable position on the table. "Ask me anything," he said. "I have nothing to hide." Torval took a deep breath and consulted her notes. "Let us start with the basics," she began. "Tell me everything you know about your home planet, and do not leave out any details no matter how normal they might seem to you." And so Marcus started talking about Earth, about the oceans and the mountains and the forests, about the weather and the seasons and the animals, about the cities and the technology and the billions of people who called that small blue world there. Homie spoke as if everything he described was perfectly ordinary, because to him it was, but with every word he said, Torval's expression grew more and more troubled by the time he was finished. She understood something that would send shockwaves through the entire galaxy. The humans had not just survived on a death world. They had conquered it. And now they were coming to the stars. The question was whether the galaxy was ready for them. And based on what she had seen tonight, Torval was not sure the answer was yes. Torval sat in silence for a long moment after Marcus finished describing his home planet, her mind struggling to process the incredible things she had just heard. According to the human, Earth was a world of extremes, a place where temperatures could range from -50 degrees to +50 degrees depending on location and season, where massive storms called hurricanes could destroy entire cities in a matter of hours, and where the ground itself would sometimes shake so violently that buildings would collapse and mountains would explode, and that was just the planet. Itself, the creatures that lived on Earth were equally terrifying. From giant bears that could tear a person apart with a single swipe of their claws, to tiny insects that carried diseases capable of killing millions of people throughout history. Even the plants were dangerous, with some producing toxins that could stop a heart in seconds, and others covered in thorns and spines that would cause agony to anything that touched them. Your oceans, Torval said slowly, still trying to wrap her mind around what she had learned. You said they contain creatures called sharks that are basically just teeth and muscle designed for killing. Yes, Marcus confirmed. But sharks are not really that dangerous if you know how to handle them, because most of them will leave you alone unless you do something to provoke them. And yet your species swims in these oceans for recreation. All the time, Marcus said with a smile. We also surf, which means riding on top of the waves on a flat board. And scuba dive, which means going deep underwater with a tank of air so we can see the fish and coral up close. Torval made a note on her datapad. Adding this to the growing list of insane human behaviors that seemed perfectly normal to Marcus. Let us return to the subject of your food, she said. You mentioned earlier that the thorn fruit reduction reminded you of something called capsaicin, which you said was found in peppers on your world. That is right, Marcus agreed. Chili peppers contain capsaicin, which is the chemical that makes them taste hot and spicy. And different peppers have different levels of heat, depending on how much capsaicin they contain. And you said that humans deliberately cultivate these peppers and add them to their food. Oh yes. Spicy food is extremely popular on Earth, and there are entire cultures built around eating the hottest peppers possible, with competitions to see who can handle the most extreme levels of heat. Torval set down her datapad and looked directly at Marcus with an expression of complete bewilderment. Lieutenant Commander Chun, I need you to understand something very important, she said carefully. Capsaicin is chemically similar to compound VX99, which means that your species has evolved to not only tolerate but actually enjoy consuming a substance that would be lethal to virtually every other species in the known galaxy. Marcus thought about this for a moment. So when I ate the thorn fruit reduction, he said slowly, my body just treated it like regular spicy food. That appears to be exactly what happened, Torval confirmed. Your biology processed the compound as if it were nothing more than a mild irritant. And instead of dying, you simply experienced what you described as a pleasant warming sensation. She pulled up a holographic display showing a comparison between human physiology and the average galactic species. And Marcus could immediately see that there were significant differences. Your species has multiple redundant systems, Torval explained, pointing to different parts of the diagram. 2 kidneys when one would suffice. A liver that can regenerate itself if damaged. An immune system that actively fights off foreign invaders. And a skeletal structure that can heal itself after being broken. Those things are pretty standard for humans, Marcus said, not understanding why this was so remarkable. They're not standard for anyone else, Torval replied firmly. Most species have single point of failure organs that will cause death if damaged. Immune systems that can only handle specific known pathogens. And bones that once broken will never fully recover. She zoomed in on a section of the display showing the human nervous system. Your pain response is also completely abnormal by galactic standards, she continued. Where most species would be incapacitated by injuries that humans routinely survive and recover from. Your people seem to have developed an ability to push through pain and continue functioning even when severely wounded. That is because of adrenaline, Marcus explained. When we are in danger or under stress, our bodies release chemicals that help us ignore pain and focus on survival. And it can give us a temporary boost of strength and speed as well. Torval made another note, her stylus moving across the datapad with increasing urgency. You are describing a combat stimulant that your bodies produce naturally, she said, her voice rising slightly. Other species have to take artificial drugs to achieve that kind of effect. And even then it often kills them afterward. She stood up and began pacing around the medical bay, her mind racing through the implications of everything she had learned. Lieutenant Commander Chun, she said finally, stopping in front of him with a very serious expression. I have been a xenophysician for 40 cycles, and I have treated patients from every corner of the galaxy. But I have never encountered anything like you or your species. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Marcus asked. Torval was quiet for a long moment before answering. I honestly do not know, she admitted. What I do know is that humanity is unlike anything the galaxy has ever seen before. And your arrival is going to change everything. She moved to her console and began typing rapidly, pulling up files and sending messages to other departments. Your species evolved on a Category 12 death world, she continued, which means that every aspect of your biology has been shaped by the need to survive in an environment that would kill any other known life form. She turned back to face Marcus with an expression that was part fear and part respect. Out here in the wider galaxy, Lieutenant Commander, there are no death worlds, no extreme environments, no constant threats that force species to become stronger and more resilient with each generation. She took a step closer, looking directly into his eyes. Out here, you and your people are not just survivors, she said quietly. You are the most terrifying thing the galaxy has ever seen. I think it is going to take a very long time for anyone to truly understand what that means. Marcus sat in silence, processing her words and feeling a strange mix of pride and concern. He'd never thought of himself as terrifying, and he was not sure he liked the idea of his species being viewed that way, but he also understood that Torval was not wrong. Because if a simple dinner sauce could kill everyone else in the galaxy while he just thought it was tasty, then maybe humans really were different in ways that mattered. The question was what to do with that knowledge, and Marcus was determined to make sure the answer was something good. The diplomatic summit reconvened the following morning, but the atmosphere in the Great Hall had changed completely from the night before, where the alien delegates had once viewed the human visitors as curious newcomers from a distant world. They now looked at Marcus and his team with expressions that ranged from cautious respect to outright fear. Ambassador Krelvath had spent the entire night rewriting his welcoming speech, crossing out phrases like junior partners and replacing them with words like honored equals and valued allies. The news of what had happened at the banquet had spread through the station like wildfire, and by morning, every species in the Concordat knew that the humans could survive poisons that would kill anyone else in seconds. Marcus walked into the hall with his 3 fellow delegates behind him, very aware of the whispers and stares that followed his every step. They are looking at us differently today, whispered Lieutenant Sarah Park, one of the other humans on the diplomatic team. I noticed, Marcus replied quietly. Just stay calm and professional, and hopefully we can get through this without any more incidents. The seats that had been assigned to the human delegation had been moved during the night, and they were now positioned at the head table, right next to Ambassador Krelvath himself. This was a place of high honor that was usually reserved only for the most powerful and respected species in the Concordat. And the message was clear: humanity had arrived, and the galaxy was paying attention. Krelvath rose to address the assembly, his skin shifting through careful shades of formal purple as he spoke. Distinguished delegates, he began, we gather today to welcome humanity to our community of worlds. And I must admit that last night's events have given us much to think about. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. The humans come from a world unlike any we have known, Krelvath continued. A world of extremes and dangers. a world that has shaped them into beings of remarkable strength and resilience. He turned to look directly at Marcus. Lieutenant Commander, Chun demonstrated something extraordinary last night. Something that has forced us to reconsider many of our assumptions about what is possible for living creatures. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, not enjoying being the center of so much attention. But I believe, Krelvoth went on, that what matters most is not what the humans can survive, but what they choose to do with their unique abilities. He gestured for Marcus to stand. And after a moment of hesitation, the human rose to his feet. Lieutenant Commander, would you like to address the assembly? Marcus had not prepared a speech, and for a moment he stood in silence, looking out at the sea of alien faces watching him with such intensity. But then he thought about why he had become a medic in the first place, and why he had accepted this diplomatic assignment. And the words came naturally. Thank you, Ambassador Krelvoth, he began. And thank you to everyone here for welcoming us so warmly, even after I accidentally scared everyone by eating something I should not have. A few nervous laughs echoed through the hall. I want to be honest with all of you, Marcus continued. I am just a regular person from a regular family on Earth. And until yesterday, I had no idea that anything about me was considered unusual by galactic standards. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Where I come from, we have a saying that with great power comes great responsibility. And I think that applies to what we are all learning about humanity right now. He looked around the room, making eye contact with as many delegates as he could. Yes, humans evolved on a tough world, and yes, we can apparently survive things that would hurt others. But that does not make us better than anyone else. And it certainly does not make us dangerous. The Kroth warrior, who had knelt before him the night before, was watching with intense focus. I spent most of my career as a medic, Marcus explained, which means my job was to help people, to heal the wounded, to save lives whenever I could. And that is still who I am. He took a deep breath before continuing. Humanity is not here to conquer or intimidate anyone. And we are not here to use our biology as a weapon, because the whole point of reaching the stars was to find friends, to learn from other species, and to build something better together. He looked toward Torval, who was standing at the back of the hall watching him carefully. Chief Xenophysician Torval told me last night that humanity might be the most terrifying thing the galaxy has ever seen, he said. And I understand why she feels that way. He turned back to the assembly. But I am asking all of you to give us a chance to show you who we really are. Not through what we can survive, but through what we choose to do. Through the kindness we show, the bridges we build, and the friendships we make. The hall was completely silent as Marcus finished speaking. Then, slowly, Ambassador Krelvoth began to move his hands together in what Marcus recognized as the Velician gesture of applause. Other delegates joined in, some using hands, others using tentacles or claws or other appendages, until the entire hall was filled with the sound of approval. After the formal session ended, Marcus found Torval waiting for him outside the great hall. That was a good speech, she said simply. I meant every word of it, Marcus replied. Torval studied him for a long moment. This strange human who could drink poison like water, and yet spoke of peace and friendship as if they were the most important things in the universe. I believe you, she said finally. And I think that might be what makes your species truly remarkable, not your ability to survive, but your choice to be kind, despite having the power to be otherwise. She extended her crystalline fingers toward him in the human handshake gesture she had researched. Friends? She asked. Marcus smiled and wrapped his impossibly durable human hand around her delicate alien fingers. Friends, he agreed. Far across the galaxy, on a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, the news of what had happened at Station Meridian 7 was just beginning to arrive. Headlines would soon explode across every screen and newsfeed on Earth. telling the incredible story of the diplomatic dinner where a human ate deadly poison and asked for seconds, and in a small apartment in Chengdu. An elderly woman named Chen Wei watched the news with a knowing smile on her face. She had always said that her hot pot would prepare her grandson for anything. With its bubbling broth, full of the hottest peppers she could find. She had no idea how right she had been, but as she watched Marcus shake hands with an alien doctor on a space station countless light years away, she felt nothing but pride for the boy she had raised. The boy who had taken the fire she had given him and used it to reach for the stars. The galaxy would never be the same. And that was probably a good thing, because if there was one thing humans had always been good at, it was making friends in unexpected places, and this was only the beginning of what they would accomplish together.